They wrote him off as just another grease-stained nobody from the sticks, a small-town gearhead who'd rather wrestle a rusty engine than a textbook, until he cracked a chemistry riddle that left PhDs choking on their own degrees. When a smug, hotshot professor tried to grind him into the dirt in front of a room full of snickering college elites, he flipped the script with a move no one saw coming. But the real jaw-dropper? What went down after that? Buckle up for a gritty, heart-pounding saga of guts, brains, and a comeback that'll make you holler. Drop a comment with where you're tuning in from. And if you live for underdog stories that hit like a sledgehammer, smash that subscribe button. Tomorrow we've got another epic tale of triumph you won't want to skip. The late September heat shimmered over the limestone sprawl of Indiana University's Bloomington campus, baking the red brick paths and seeping through the grimy windows of Swain Hall's biggest lecture theater. Inside, the air thrummed with the restless hum of 300 undergrads, some doodling in spiral notebooks, others sneaking X updates on their phones, all braced for the Category 5 hurricane about to tear through the door. It was a Wednesday morning in Professor Leonard Grayson's Organic Chemistry 305, a class that haunted dorm room legends across the Midwest. Soul-crushing exams, pop quizzes that landed like haymakers, and Grayson himself, a titan with a tongue sharp enough to strip rust off a tailpipe. At 9 a.m. sharp, Grayson stormed in, his polished wingtips clacking on the tile like a drum roll before a firing squad. At 6 feet 3 inches, with jet black hair swept back and a sneer that could sour whiskey, he looked like a mob boss who traded his pinstripes for a lab coat. Except this guy had tenure and a trophy case of accolades from the American Chemical Society. 25 years at IU, a textbook with his name in bold across the spine, and a rumored 6-figure gig consulting for Big Pharma had forged him into a legend. He didn't teach chemistry, he dominated it, shredding egos with the precision of a mass spectrometer. "Sit up straight," he barked, slamming a stack of papers onto the podium with a crack that bounced off the vaulted ceiling. The room snapped to attention like soldiers at muster. Last week, we slogged through stereochemistry. Today, it's reaction mechanisms. If you can't keep up, there's the door. Don't trip on your way out. He spun to the towering smartboard dominating the wall and started tapping out a sprawling synthesis pathway. Arrows zigzagging like a drunk highway map, molecules twisting into each other, a chemical gauntlet designed to crush the weak and scatter their bones. 10 rows back, a wiry figure slouched in a faded Carhartt jacket, his steel-toe boots scuffed with grease from a summer spent under the hoods of Shelby County's beat-up pickups. Caleb Holt, 20, was a sophomore from Shelbyville, Indiana, a fly-speck town where the biggest news was the annual tractor pull, and the only skyline was a row of rusted grain silos swaying in the wind. His dark hair poked out from a worn John Deere cap, and his notebook was a battlefield, oil-smudged margins, sketches of carburetors and timing belts, and half-scribbled equations bleeding into each other. He'd clawed his way into IU on a trade school scholarship for Rural Innovators, a program that branded him a charity case for the trust fund brats who'd prepped at elite academies while Caleb was patching his dad's '89 Chevy with baling wire, duct tape, and a prayer to the gods of internal combustion. Chemistry wasn't just a course for Caleb, it was his war zone. Back in Shelbyville, he'd learned it the hard way, mixing biodiesel in a sagging barn to keep the family's rigs rolling after gas prices spiked in '09. At 14, he'd rigged a still from scavenged copper pipes and a dented propane tank, tweaking ethanol blends with a dog-eared copy of Chemistry for Dummies he'd swiped from the county library after the librarian gave him a pitying nod. By 16, he was distilling his own fuel additives, scribbling molar rate ratios on the back of feed receipts while his old man cursed the drought. By 17, he was the go-to fix-it guy for half the farmers in the county, troubleshooting fuel injectors and muttering reaction equations under his breath, while his buddies chugged Busch Light by the creek bed, shotgunning cans and betting on who'd puke first. He didn't talk much. Words were for city folk with too much time. Chemicals and machines, they spoke his language, loud and clear as a V8 at full roar. As Grayson's synthesis sprawled across the board, Caleb's gray eyes narrowed under the brim of his cap. Something was off, a glitch in the second step, a catalyst so weak it'd tanked the whole reaction faster than a blown gasket. He rubbed his jaw, calluses rasping against stubble, weighing the odds of speaking up. No one else seemed to clock it, or they weren't dumb enough to poke the grizzly in the room. Then a hand popped up near the front. Professor Grayson, Emily Parker, a junior with a nervous tic and a habit of overanalyzing, quavered. I think the reagent in step 1 might be wrong. Grayson didn't even turn his head. It's not wrong, Ms. Parker. Your brain's the problem. Sit down and spare us the whining. Emily shriveled into her seat, her cheeks flaming red as a wave of snickers rolled through the rows, the preppy kids in the front lapping it up like it was open mic night. Caleb couldn't let it ride. He raised his hand, slow, steady, like he was flagging a tractor hauling hay on a dusty back road. Grayson zeroed in, his sneer stretching wide as a shark's grin. Well, well, Mr. Holt, is it? Got some barnyard brilliance to bless us with today? The room chuckled, a few polo shirt punks in the front, elbowing each other like it was a comedy roast. There's a mistake, Caleb said, his voice rough but firm, carrying the slow drawl of Shelby County like a badge. The catalyst in step 2, it's too weak. You'd get a side reaction, not the product you're aiming for. A collective gasp sucked the air out of the room, followed by stifled laughs that fizzled fast. Grayson's eyes narrowed to slits, glinting like a predator sizing up lunch. Oh, really? Step up, grease monkey. Fix my chemistry. Let's see if you've got anything under that cap besides hay. Caleb stood, all 5'11" inches of him, unfolding like a switchblade snapping open. He wasn't here to play hero. He just couldn't stomach sloppy science any more than he could a misfired engine. He trudged to the board, boots thudding on the tile, every stare boring into him like a spotlight on a deer in headlights. Grayson handed him the stylus with a mock bow, stepping back like a boxer daring a rookie to throw the first punch. Show us then. Don't waste my time, or theirs. Caleb didn't blink. He swiped away the faulty step and redrew it, his blocky lines a stark contrast to Grayson's crisp surgical arrows. You used palladium here, he said, tapping the screen with the stylus. It's too mild, lets the alkene isomerize and kills your yield faster than a hog in a heat wave. Swap it for rhodium and you lock the chain down tight. He clicked the stylus off, turned, and faced the room, his expression flat as a gravel road baking under a noon sun. Grayson stared at the board, his sneer melting into a taut grimace that twitched at the corners. The silence hung thick as motor oil dripping slow. Huh, he grunted at last, his tone cold enough to frost a windshield in July. You're not wrong. Sit down. No praise, no backpedal, just a nod sharp as a razor's edge. Caleb trudged back, ignoring the gawking faces and the low buzz rippling through the seats like static on a bad radio. But Grayson felt it, the room tilting toward this nobody in a trucker cap, and it stuck in his craw like a burr under a saddle. If Mr. Holt's so keen to play chemist, Grayson said, snatching the stylus back with a flick of his wrist, let's see if he's got the guts for a real challenge. He tapped out a monster, a multi-step synthesis with a tricky stereo-specific twist, a radical intermediate that'd make your head spin like a stripped gear, and a yield calculation that'd stump a postdoc on a good day. It sprawled across the screen like a chemical hydra, snarling and ugly, daring anyone to take a swing. Solve this, he said, stepping back with a venomous grin that bared his teeth, or crawl back to your tractor where you belong, farm boy. The room erupted in whispers that buzzed like a hive kicked over. This wasn't a lesson. It was a public gutting, a lynching with equations instead of rope. Caleb studied the screen, his jaw clenching under the shadow of his cap. He knew the play. Grayson wanted him to crash and burn, to prove one lucky catch didn't make a mastermind. A few kids smirked, their eyes glinting with glee. Others winced, bracing for the wreckage. Caleb grabbed the stylus again. He didn't rush. His mind kicked into gear like the V8 he'd rebuilt last summer. Slow to crank, then roaring full tilt down the quarter mile. He broke the problem into chunks, sketching intermediates and muttering under his breath like he was diagnosing a flooded carburetor. Radical's unstable. Gotta trap it fast with a quencher, reroute the electrons. Line by line, the mess untangled itself. The smirks faded into frowns. Students leaned in, phones slipping out to record, lenses glinting in the fluorescent light. Emily whispered to her neighbor, "Holy crap, he's actually doing it. I thought he'd tank." 50 minutes later, Caleb stepped back, sweat beading under his cap. The screen glowed with a perfect pathway, clean, logical, with a yield calculation circled in red. 87%. He'd even flagged an alternate route with a cheaper catalyst. Unasked for but slick as hell, the kind of practical fix he'd learned from stretching a gallon of diesel to last a week. "That's it," he said, tossing the stylus onto the podium with a clatter. The room went graveyard quiet, the kind of hush that falls when a storm's eye passes overhead. Grayson stalked over, arms crossed tight, scanning every arrow like a hawk hunting a field mouse under the stubble. He found nothing to claw at, not a damn thing. "You skipped the transition state," he snapped, fishing for a crack to pry open. Caleb shrugged, hands jammed deep in his pockets, his drawl cutting through the tension. "Worked it in my head. Didn't need to draw it out. Math holds up. Check it yourself." Grayson's lip twitched, a flicker of irritation cracking his mask like a chip in a windshield. "Fine, sit." But as Caleb turned, the applause hit, raw, ragged, swelling to a roar that shook the walls and rattled the windows. A kid in the back hollered, "Get it, farm boy, stick it to him." Grayson's face turned storm cloud dark, his jaw grinding like he was chewing gravel. But he swallowed whatever venom was clawing up his throat. That night, Emily's video blew up on TikTok. "Small-town kid owns chem prof," racking up 30,000 views by midnight and climbing fast. Caleb didn't catch wind of it. He was holed up in his dorm, tweaking a biodiesel formula on graph paper under the flicker of a desk lamp, while his roommate, Travis Boone, a lanky gearhead from Terre Haute with a buzz cut and a gap-toothed grin that lit up a room, tried to drag him to a bonfire down by the quarry. "Bro, you're a damn rock star now," Travis said, chucking him a root beer that Caleb caught one-handed. "Grayson's gonna come for your throat. Heard he's been pacing his office like a caged bull." Caleb grinned, his drawl thick as molasses on a cold morning. "Let him try. I've wrestled worse from a seized piston, and won." The next class rolled in 2 days later, and the air crackled like a storm front bearing down on the plains. Students jammed the hall early, whispering about the mechanic who smoked Grayson, their voices a low hum that buzzed through the rows. Caleb slipped in late, same Carhartt jacket, same John Deere cap pulled low, and dropped into his seat next to Travis, who was bouncing like a kid on Christmas morning with a new wrench set. "They're calling you the Shelby chemist, man," Travis muttered, elbowing him hard enough to jostle his cap. "Grayson's steaming. Heard he trashed his office after you left last time. Threw a stapler through a window or some crap." Caleb just nodded, twirling his pencil like it was a socket wrench, his eyes fixed on the front. Grayson marched in with a leather briefcase and a scowl that could peel paint off a barn door, his hair slicked back tighter than usual, like he'd spent the morning wrestling his own demons. He didn't waste a breath. "Before we start," he said, his voice a low growl that rumbled through the room like distant thunder, "I've got news. IU's been tapped for the National Chemistry Challenge, live timed, against the heavy hitters, MIT, Caltech, the whole damn circus. Cameras, crowds, no mercy. I've nominated our top dog." His eyes drilled into Caleb like twin lasers cutting steel. "Mr. Holt, I reckon you're game. Or you gonna run back to your pig pen?" It was a trap, obvious as a rattlesnake coiled in a hen house, rattling its tail. Caleb locked eyes with him, unflinching, his cap tipped back just enough to show the steel in his gaze. "I'm in." The room hummed like a live wire sparking in the rain. Travis elbowed him again, hissing under his breath. "He's gonna bury you alive, dude. He's got that look." Caleb's voice stayed steady, low and hard as a forged bolt. "Not if I bury him first. He's about to learn what Shelby grit's made of." The challenge was 8 weeks out, and Caleb turned his life into a full-on war zone. A gritty, no-sleep, all-in brawl with the periodic table. He staked out a corner of the library's 3rd floor, textbooks piled like sandbags around a foxhole, empty Mountain Dew cans littering the table like spent brass. whiteboards smeared with reaction chains that sprawled like battle maps across the Western Front. Sleep was a ghost story he'd heard once, traded for caffeine, adrenaline, and the burn of Grayson's sneer searing into his skull like a branding iron. This wasn't about glory. It was survival, pure and raw. Back home, he'd kept the farm afloat with elbow grease and a stubborn streak wider than the Wabash River. This was just another fix-it job, bigger stakes, sharper teeth, and a hell of a lot more eyes watching. He started with the basics: nucleophilic substitutions, electrophilic additions, grinding through them like he was tuning a carburetor, methodical and relentless. Then he dove headfirst into the deep end. Organometallics with their finicky ligands, kinetics that twisted like a bad fuel line, computational modeling that made his laptop wheeze like an old mare. Nights blurred into dawn as he tore through old challenge problems from dusty binders he'd borrowed from a TA, his pencil scratching like a machine gun on full auto. He'd mutter to himself, working kinks out loud in that slow Shelby drawl. No, the leaving group's too bulky. Swap it for chloride, reroute the electron flow, keep the damn yield from tanking. Travis turned into his wingman, a one-man pit crew hauling in pizza boxes, bags of beef jerky, and jugs of sweet tea to keep Caleb's engine firing. He'd perch on a chair, tossing softball questions like lobs over the plate. What's the rate law for this SN2 mess? And cackle when Caleb batted them back without looking up. "You're a freak, man," Travis said one night, shaking his head as Caleb sketched a reaction coordinate diagram on a napkin. "Grayson's got no idea what's coming." Word spread like wildfire through the chem department, crackling through group chats and study lounges. Classmates dubbed him the alchemist, half joking, half reverent, and started drifting by during breaks to throw him curveballs. Enzyme catalysis puzzles that knotted your brain, polymerization traps straight out of a nightmare textbook. "Bet you can't crack this?" a bio major named Kyla Torres challenged one evening, sliding him a photocopy of a protein synthesis gone haywire, complete with a misfolded peptide chain and a side reaction that'd choke a supercomputer. Caleb scanned it, smirked, and handed it back solved in 15 minutes flat, the ink still wet on his fixes. "My still's trickier than that," he drawled, leaning back in his chair with a root beer in hand. Kyla laughed, shaking her head, her braids swinging. "You're a freak, Holt. Certified grade A, barn-raised freak." It morphed into a full-blown ritual, students crowding around his library nook like it was a Friday night bonfire, betting snacks, gas money, or crumpled dollar bills on who could trip him up. Travis christened it Chem Cage Match, and soon 24 regulars showed up nightly, scribbling their own problems on napkins, scratch paper, even the backs of old lab reports, just to test the mechanic's mettle. One evening, a grad student named Diego Vargas lobbed a beast into the ring, a photochemical reaction with a quantum yield twist, a hidden side product, and a temperature coefficient that'd make a seasoned prof sweat. Caleb stared at it for 2 hours, pacing the room like a coyote on a scent, then cracked it with a workaround so slick Diego just whistled low through his teeth. "You're a machine, man. Straight out of the barn. Built different." 3 weeks in, Grayson ambushed him after class, cornering him in the hall outside Swain as students streamed past, their whispers trailing like exhaust fumes. "You're in over your head, Holt," he said, voice low and venomous, his shadow looming over Caleb like a thunderhead rolling in from the plains. "This ain't some backwoods puzzle you can duct tape together. This is the big leagues, and you're gonna crash hard, burn out, and leave nothing but smoke." Caleb met his stare, unflinching, his cap tipped back just enough to show the steel in his eyes, gray as a storm cloud and twice as hard. "Guess we'll see who's still standing come game day, huh?" "I've fixed worse than you with less." Grayson's jaw tightened, a vein pulsing in his temple like a live wire. But he spun on his heel and stalked off, his wingtips echoing down the corridor, leaving a chill in the air that lingered like bad exhaust on a still morning. The pressure didn't let up. It piled on, heavier with every tick of the clock. 4 weeks out, Caleb hit a wall, a brutal kinetics problem from a 19 challenge that refused to crack, a rate law so tangled it might as well have been written in tongues. He spent 3 nights on it, chugging Red Bull and pacing the library like a caged animal, his boots wearing a groove in the carpet. He tore through textbooks, scrawled equations across 2 whiteboards until they looked like a madman's manifesto, and cursed under his breath when the numbers wouldn't line up. At 3 a.m. on the third night, alone under flickering fluorescence with the janitor's mop echoing down the hall, he spotted the trick, a temperature shift he'd overlooked, skewing the activation energy. He solved it, slumped into a chair, and grinned like he'd just rebuilt a blown engine from a pile of scrap. Travis found him there at dawn, sprawled out with the whiteboard victorious behind him, a can of Red Bull dangling from his hand. "You're a lunatic," Travis said, tossing him a granola bar that Caleb caught without opening his eyes. "But you're gonna kill it, man. Grayson's toast." 2 weeks out, the stakes spiked again. A junior named Riley, a wiry kid with a chipped tooth and a chip on his shoulder, bet $10 he could stump Caleb with a problem he'd swiped from his TA gig, a catalytic reforming reaction with a poison catalyst and a yield drop that'd make a pro cry. The Chem Cage match crew gathered tight, holding their breath as Caleb stared it down. He worked it for an hour, muttering about surface adsorption and tweaking the mechanism in his head, then handed it back with a solution that boosted the yield by 20%. Riley gaped, forked over the cash, and muttered, "You're a damn wizard." Caleb pocketed the 10 spot with a shrug. Just math and a little elbow grease. The night before the challenge, Caleb crashed on a bench outside the chem building, the campus hushed under a blanket of stars that stretched wide as the Indiana plains he'd grown up under. He'd always loved the dark. Back in Shelbyville, it was just him, the crickets, and the hum of a jury-rigged generator under a sky so big it swallowed you whole. No judgment, no noise. Now it felt like the stars were holding their breath, waiting to see if he'd fold under the weight of it all. He didn't panic. He ran the mechanisms in his head, step by step, reaction by reaction, until they clicked like a well-oiled engine, firing on all cylinders, smooth and unstoppable. "Just another job," he muttered, kicking a pebble into the grass, watching it skitter into the shadows. "Get it done, Holt. Same as always." The National Chemistry Challenge hit like a freight train at Purdue's gleaming engineering complex, a cavernous hall packed with 600 spectators, buzzing with TV crews, college banners flapping in the recycled air, and the sharp tang of anticipation cutting through the crowd. Caleb stepped off the IU bus in his Carhartt and cap, dwarfed by grad students in pressed slacks and blazers who strutted like they owned the joint, their egos as polished as their loafers. Grayson sat third row, arms crossed tight, his black hair slicked back like a shark fin, slicing through the sea of faces. His eyes locked on Caleb with a mix of disdain and something sharper. Fear, maybe, buried deep. Caleb's rivals were a murderer's row, a Caltech senior named Priya Khan, with a patent pending on a polymer coating that had made industry headlines, and my PhD candidate, Jamal Carter, who'd co-authored a paper in Nature Chemistry at 24, and a dozen others with resumes that screamed future laureate, their pedigrees glinting like trophies. They sized him up, smirking like he'd wandered in off a dirt road with mud still on his boots, until the first round scores flashed on the Jumbotron, and Caleb tied Jamal at the top, neck and neck like two racers at the Indy 500. The problems escalated like a bar fight on Fast Forward, each round a new slugfest. Retro synthesis brainbusters that twisted your mind into knots tighter than a rusted lug nut. Kinetics curveballs with hidden traps that'd trip you if you blinked. A computational nightmare with a buggy molecular model that crashed half the tablets in the room and left contestants cursing under their breath. Caleb didn't flinch. His hands danced across the screen, untangling chaos into order, like he was rewiring a fried alternator under a ticking clock. By round 3, he surged ahead, cracking a catalytic cycle in half the time, his solution lean and lethal, cutting through the clutter like a chainsaw through dry timber. Jamal shot him a glance, respect warring with shock, his jaw tight. The crowd murmured, a ripple spreading through the stands. "Who's the guy in the cap?" Round 4 threw a photochemical puzzle with a quantum twist, a beast that had Priya sweating and Jamal scribbling like his life depended on it. Caleb dismantled it in 20 minutes. his fingers flying so fast the proctor double-checked his tablet for hacks, finding nothing but raw skill. The announcer's voice crackled over the PA, a hint of disbelief creeping in. "Holt's pulling ahead. Folks, we've got a dark horse tearing up the track." Grayson's sneer vanished, his fingers digging into his program until the paper crumpled, his knuckles white as bone. Round 5 was a gut punch, a polymer synthesis with a runaway reaction and a yield drop that'd make a seasoned chemist weep. Priya's tablet glitched under the strain, her curses audible 2 seats down, while Jamal ground his teeth, his stylus scraping like a dying engine. Caleb leaned into it, his cap shadowing a faint smirk as he spotted the flaw, a catalyst overdose, and rerouted the pathway with a fix he'd learned from tweaking biodiesel blends. He submitted early, leaned back, and cracked his knuckles while the clock still had 15 minutes to burn. The crowd buzzed louder, a chant starting in the IU section. "Shell by chemists, shell by chemists." Grayson shifted in his seat, his jaw grinding like he was chewing nails, his program now a shredded mess in his lap. The final round dropped like a bomb straight out of hell. Design a synthesis for a cancer drug from scratch, with a tricky chiral center, a tight yield deadline of 85%, and a curveball, a contaminant in the starting material you had to neutralize on the fly. The timer ticked. 75 minutes. Caleb stared at the screen, his mind roaring like a diesel at redline, cylinders firing hot and fast. He saw it, a sneaky shortcut through the stereochemistry, a catalyst swap no one else clocked, and a filtration trick he'd perfected distilling fuel in the barn, stripping impurities like a pro. While Jamal and Priya slogged through brute force pathways, Caleb pivoted, his solution ruthless and brilliant, every step snapping into place like a perfectly tuned engine hitting its stride. At minute 68, he submitted, leaning back with a slow exhale that fogged the air in front of him. The room held its breath, 600 pairs of eyes glued to the judges, hunched over their screens. Jamal finished at 74, his stylus clattering to the table, sweat streaking his brow like he'd run a marathon. Priya hit the buzzer at 74:59, her hands shaking so hard she nearly dropped her tablet. The head judge, a gruff Purdue prof with a buzz cut and a clipboard, thick as a brick, stepped to the mic, his voice booming over the PA. After review, the winner, with a record-breaking score of 98 out of 100, the highest in challenge history, Caleb Holt, Indiana University. The hall detonated, cheers, stomps, a roar that rattled the rafters and shook the glass walls. Travis leaped up in the stands, hollering, "That's my brother from another mother. Told you he'd smoke 'em," as strangers mobbed Caleb with high fives, backslaps, and shouts that drowned out the PA. Caleb stood steady as a rock in a river and took the trophy, a chrome-plated molecule model gleaming under the spotlights like a prize belt forged in fire. Cameras flashed, the crowd chanted his name, and the Jumbotron replayed his final solution in slow motion, the elegance of it drawing gasps even from the losing teams. Jamal walked over, extended a hand and said, "Man, you're unreal. Respect." Priya nodded from her seat, too shell-shocked to speak. Caleb shook Jamal's hand, his drawl cutting through the chaos. "Good fight, man." Grayson clapped, slow, stiff, his face a mask of granite carved with cracks. As Caleb passed on his way off the stage, their eyes locked through the madness, a silent showdown in the eye of the storm. "Not bad, Holt," Grayson said, his voice cracking like thin ice under a boot, betraying a tremor he couldn't hide. Caleb nodded, his tone low and hard. "Thanks. Took more than you thought, huh?" Grayson's lip twitched, but he said nothing, his silence louder than the crowd. Back at IU, Caleb turned into a campus legend overnight. Less a man, more a myth whispered in awe. The Purdue video hit YouTube, Mechanic Kid Crushes Humiliates, racking up 5 million views in a week, trending with hashtags like Scheuer Shelby Chemist, Darn Underdog King, and Grayson got schooled. Students fist-bumped him in the quad, shouting, "Give 'em hell, Holt." Profs tipped their hats in the halls like he was a war hero back from the front. The cafeteria ladies slipped him extra fries and winked, calling him our boy. Even the janitors gave him nods of respect as they swept past his library nook. But Caleb stayed Caleb. Same Carhartt jacket, same John Deere cap, same late nights tinkering with formulas in the glow of a desk lamp, like the world hadn't just shifted under his steel-toed boots. A month later, the chem department threw a low-key celebration in Swain Hall, a pizza party with cheap soda, and a banner that read, "IU's National Champ." Caleb showed up late, dragged in by Travis, who threatened to tow him there with a chain if he didn't come. The room cheered as he walked in, a roar that made him duck his head, tugging his cap lower. A senior prof, Dr. Ellis, a wiry old-timer with a drawl of his own, pulled him aside and clapped his shoulder. "You've got the whole faculty buzzing, son. Haven't seen a kid like you since I was at Purdue in '82. Grayson's been quiet lately, real quiet." Caleb cracked a grin, rare and quick. "Good, means he's thinking." 2 months after the challenge, Grayson summoned him to his office, a sleek den of glass and steel overlooking the campus green, awards glinting on the walls like medals from a war Caleb hadn't signed up to fight. He braced for a fight, hands stuffed deep in his pockets, his cap shadowing his eyes. Instead, Grayson slid a thick packet across the desk, his fingers lingering on it like he was handing over a live grenade. "The department's putting you up for the Goldwater Scholarship. Full ride, top of the list. And Dow Chemical's begging for you to intern next summer. 6 figures, benefits, the works. They're calling you the mechanic with the Midas touch." Caleb blinked, thrown off his footing like a truck hitting black ice. "Why me?" Grayson leaned back, a ghost of a grin cracking his stone facade. The first real break in his armor Caleb had ever seen. "Because you don't just solve chemistry, Holt. You bend it to your damn will, break it, and build it back better. I figured you'd crash and burn. Thought you were all smoke, no fire. I was dead wrong, and I don't say that lightly." Caleb took the packet, its weight settling into his hands like a toolbox fresh off the shelf, solid and real. He hadn't come to IU to prove a damn thing. Not to Grayson, not to Shelbyville, not to the world spinning beyond the plains. But standing there, he felt it. The fire that had hauled him from a sagging barn under an Indiana sky to this moment. A kid who'd turned grease, grit, and a stubborn streak wider than the Midwest itself into pure, unadulterated gold. He wasn't just a mechanic anymore. He was a force, a small-town storm rewriting the rules of what a dreamer with dirty hands could do. One reaction, one fight, one win at a time. This ain't just about chemistry. It's about kicking down doors with steel-toed boots, spitting in the face of doubt, and building something unbreakable from the dirt up. Caleb didn't chase the spotlight. He forged it, step by a stubborn step. Proving genius doesn't need a fancy zip code, a silver spoon, or a corner office. Just a spark, a wrench, and the guts to let it blaze. In a world drowning in noise, privilege, and polished resumes, his story cuts through like a blade through butter. Real power's quiet, tough, and born in the heartland, forged in barns and back roads. So next time someone counts you out, channel Caleb. Grab your tools, dig in, and show them what American grit's made of. If this lit a fire under your boots, hit that like, subscribe, and share it with someone who needs a kick in the pants. Because the best stories don't just inspire, they ignite, and this one's burning hot.